thanks for organizing this. Not sure we can cover all the areas of our rather proactive policy towards Asia, but to use that term proactive, Prime Minister Modi was thanking the EU for its proactive approach towards building up the EU-India relationship and develop the true potential of the strategic partnership. We have here the joint statement, which you can distribute, and which shows with its 53 paragraphs, which were negotiated in 10 days until the last minute of the summit, that there's a lot we can do and there's a lot we will do. This has not always been like this in EU-India relations. You remember there have been 4 years without an EU-India summit, and there has been the last year with a summit which helped us to re-establish the contacts at the highest levels and to normalize relations properly. And we have now set out here a pretty substantial course of very concrete cooperation, which admittedly is easier in the economic field and in the sector fields of cooperation than in the foreign policy field, because the modernization agenda of India very much coincides with key policies pursued in Europe, such as on climate change, on renewable energy, on smart cities, so the whole question on how to manage urbanization. And we have had also very good eye-to-eye agreement on the global challenges, on global governance. There's an extra specialized statement on climate change, clear will to work together in making the Paris Agreement implementation happen with concrete steps both sides have committed to. And also work on the WTO ministerial coming up, where EU and India do not always look in the same direction, but want to make a success of the WTO framework for trade. We also look into the SDG implementation. We have a rich field of concrete outcomes with concrete deliverables. Most visible perhaps is the significantly stepped up engagement of the European Investment Bank with this year alone a portfolio of 1.4 billion, underpinning those priorities I just mentioned. And this relates to projects notably in the field of mass transport, Metro Bangalore, now Metro Lucknow was before. 500 million goes into that. That of course should help to meet climate change goals. That should also help to transform cities into livable places and to less environmental damage places. We have agreed on significant extension of research cooperation with easing the arrival of young researchers and joint financing of cooperation under Horizon 2020. There is a horizontal aviation agreement which enters into force now, finally. After all, also member states have agreed to bilateral arrangements with India. There is increased cooperation on energy issues, notably in the context of the new world, I've forgotten the exact title of it, the Solar Energy Initiative, which will be started formally when President Macron visits India in a few weeks' time, and has been agreed already in Paris as a joint operation which would be driven by India and France, and also on fusion of nuclear fusion, the ITER project. So there's a lot which we are going to do, or which we intensify doing together. There have been certain issues of trade policy which many people have focused on their attention, but I wanted to emphasize at least many other areas where we are taking this partnership to a new quality. The famous basmati rice question, I will not go into detail, but if anyone wants to learn about it, this is paragraph 33 of the joint statement. I'm ready to answer any questions. We are working here on an issue which is of high political sensitivity in India with 1 million rice growers, and in the European Union, which also has rice growers and which has very sensitive consumers, and there are maximum residual level of a pesticide, and this is the market access for rice, which we can guarantee for the rice which will not be treated by this pesticide and which needs to be therefore traced. We help to put together a package on that traceability. We also work on geographical indication possibilities for this basmati rice. So this is an example of managing differences in time and not to let strategic partnership be infected by such difficulties. We have learned perhaps from the experiences we have made with another major Asian strategic partner some months ago, where we should have perhaps earlier better put together the right steps to avoid this overshadowing the many fields of good and concrete cooperation we have also with that Asian strategic partner by not having a statement. So the other issue is the FTA, and the FTA it is time for the FTA, as President Juncker was saying publicly at the Business Forum, and we hope that this will indeed be soon the case when the circumstances are right. There has been a meeting this week, or there is a meeting this week between the Trade Commissioner and the Commerce Secretary of India in Marrakesh, and there will be a full-fledged team from the Commission going to India, led by the chief negotiator next month. But there has not been a breakthrough, to be clear about this as well, just because some leaders meet. But the political impetus is there. Both sides want it, and President Juncker has been clear not only at the summit, but also in the discussion about the summit at the college meeting today. I end by saying that on foreign policy, not all was joy and harmony. There are some areas where we do not exactly see the situation the same way. The kind of reference to the accountability or responsibility of third countries in support of the nuclear program in DPRK, that is a specific notion which the Indian side has particularly emphasized. It is somehow expressed, was difficult to negotiate. We know which country is meant by this reference. We have also had some discussion about Myanmar. There is criticism of the situation in Myanmar, but it is voiced in a way which is certainly less explicit than what we are going to adopt on Monday at the Foreign Affairs Council. We have not been able to have the reference to full humanitarian access, which is for us key. It's one of the first steps which has to be taken. India refrains from criticizing, even indirectly, partners in the region, except its direct neighbor perhaps, and that is perhaps a heritage of its non-interference NAM at times, and also it refrains from creating difficulties to the Russian Federation. We wanted to have more specific language on Ukraine. We have specific language, but it does not use the words of sovereignty and territorial integrity. It only refers to a UN Security Council resolution, which does in turn refer to these concepts. Overall, it was a very good summit. It was a very substantial summit, and it will help us bring this strategic partnership to a new level of quality.
Thank you very much, Gunnar, for giving us that overview. I had the pleasure of listening to the Indian ambassador this morning. She had hoped to be here tonight, but she was overloaded with commitments. But she did say in relation to the FTA, it was a lovely quote, that we agreed to talk about talking as to when we could start. So she used the word sort of 3 times, which was nice. So Jana, I mean, everyone in Brussels, of course, have been focusing on the FTA for 10 years now. Do you see any possibility of movement at all with India on the trade side?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here on this panel and this discussion. I think it's very useful for everyone to meet you all here. I hope myself to learn a few things. What strikes me in this FTA discussion with India is the mixed signals that actually come out of India at the moment. On the one hand, we have a government that clearly prioritizes economic reforms. It's clearly modernizing some of its the way it runs its economy on the tax front, on the foreign direct investment front, opening up. But the Narendra Modi government has not moved at all on the trade liberalization front. So we have actually a very nationalist-minded government. I mean, this is a Hindu nationalist government with a very nationalist mindset, which I was exposed to a lot this summer. I spent 7 weeks in India this summer. So it's a strange mentality in that sense. So it's very focused on, okay, let's build factories for our local people, but there doesn't seem to be the notion that, well, if you want to build those factories, you actually need to liberalize also the tariffs that go with it, because that's the way you get to be competitive, and that's the way you also import the intermediary goods to export. So something in here seems not to be working properly. But on the other hand, there have been these declarations from the top, from Narendra Modi himself. He went to Germany this spring, and the German government and himself said they want this FTA. Same with Spain, not with France, because he did a tour, remember, it was in May. India has, as Gunnar already noticed, continues to have its traditional approach in the World Trade Organization, extremely defensive on agricultural subsidies, not wanting to necessarily move on new issues, still sticking to the old Doha agenda, which is fine in one way, but it makes the dialogue difficult. So in a way, that policy hasn't really moved on. That's my impression. Then there is, I think, a big test will be how India behaves in the RCEP negotiations. RCEP is this big regional trade agreement that is currently being negotiated by the 10 ASEAN countries and 6 other countries, including China. And this RCEP negotiation was accelerated after the TPP failed, where now you have a bit of a competition between Japan that wants to get TPP done with 11 countries, but having difficulties with it, and then now China sort of stepping in a little bit in the region and being central in this RCEP initiative. I understand there is a new round next week, negotiations where there's going to be a new exchange of market access offers, where all the RCEP members, not all of them are huge free traders either. Everyone criticizing India because India only wants to liberalize about 70%-75% of tariff lines, whereas the goal of ASEAN in particular is to look at 90%, something like that. I think the test will be there. I mean, how much can India move on that front? India has an offensive interest in services. I mean, it has been floating the idea of a trade facilitation agreement on services in the WTO, because it was actually quite defensive on the trade facilitation agreement on goods, for strange reasons. And then, yes, so in RCEP it also argues that it wants to have more commitments from its partners on services, but not, but doesn't want to move so much on goods. So we will see, I think, mixed signals. Let's see how Modi can, make things move from the top. But I think that we need a lot of further commitment.
Thank you, Jana. And Shada, you know India a little bit. You even know India's neighbour, to which Gunnar referred to quite well. Is that also an impediment to closer relations, that obsession that they have with the neighbour?
Thanks, Fraser. Before I come to that, and I'm not going to not come to that, I will. I just decided, because you're going to speak about several Asian topics, I thought I would give you grade. grade you in how you're dealing with different Asian countries. Gunnar, I know you would appreciate that. So for India, I'm giving you 8 out of 10. Because I think the efforts that are being made at the moment are really, really welcome and much needed. Just before I go to that, on trade, the only thing I want to say that it's not just the Modi government that is going slow on reform and trade liberalization. Despite the initial sort of promises that Manmohan Singh made, and then there was these 10 lost years where really liberalization and reform did not take place as many had anticipated. And I think that's because of the domestic interest, and you pointed out very well to them, to that, and especially in the farming sector. I think that's going to be very difficult to change, and you know, some Indian officials have told me off the record, deep background, that the FTA negotiations aren't going to happen very quickly, and even if they do start, it's not going to be a quick clinch, you know, not going to happen very quickly. Okay, 8 out of 10. So I have to say that relationship with India has been extremely flabby, very weak and underperforming for years and years. And it's not just one side's fault, it's been both sides. It's also been the circumstances. Unlike the Chinese, the Indians have for a long time not taken the European Union per se very seriously. That is changing now. And I think the EU has made a significant effort over the last few years, I would say 3 to 4 years, of really engaging with Europe, engaging with Asia and not just with China. So this is something that people like me and Friends of Europe and Fraser yourself as well, we've been pushing very hard. You know, Asia is not just about China, it's also about India, ASEAN, Japan, Korea, etc. And I think that message slowly but surely has sunk in. Now, we've been saying for a very long time, guys, you're stuck on FTA, you're stuck on trade, let's move beyond trade. And that's why I say 8 out of 10, because this summit has really made an effort to see how you can move from just a sort of, you know, haphazard relationship where you talk strategic, but actually you're just engaging in some kind of transactional, not even just a very lukewarm relationship. And I think that's really because of changing times. I think Trump has done a lot to make India more aware of the fact that it's just focused on Washington is a bit short-sighted. Trump and Washington at the moment are very erratic in how they deal with Asia and with India as well. One day it's hot, one day it's cold. So who do you turn to? Who do you trust? And I think that's a very important message. That's one of the changing times, and Brexit as well. I think, you know, it's very clear that India has realized that, you know, it does need the European Union as a partner. And I think Boris Johnson, notwithstanding, and, you know, memories and nostalgic memories of mythical memories of the empire, are just that. You know, the Indians are not desperate to get a deal with Britain on trade, whatever Boris Johnson and memories of empire may say. And, you know, Fraser, you've done a review of this fantastic book that I would really recommend that all of us read, Inglorious Empire by Shashi Tharoor, and I think that really points out to just why the Indians are in no rush to have this romance with Britain that, you know, the Tories think is going to happen. Of course, the emergence of China, and I don't like the term counterweight, counterbalance, but the fact is that, you know, people are realizing that you have to engage with the other powers of Asia as well, and that includes India, Japan, Korea, and ASEAN. Of course, and coming to your question about the neighbor, about Pakistan, there is, I think, a healthy, constructive competition between India and Pakistan in terms of foreign policy and relations with Europe. And I'm actually quite heartened to see that just after the summit with India, there is now, I think there's just been a joint committee meeting between the European External Action Service and with the Pakistanis. So I think even dealing with a troublesome neighbor like Pakistan, it's not in India's interest to isolate Pakistan and to make it much more of a problem than it is already at the moment. So as I said, 8 out of 10. Of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I like the 53 paragraphs. But, you know, we'll just see how much it actually turns out to be in concrete terms. But I'm impressed, and I think really sustain the effort when it comes to India.
Thanks, Shannon. We look forward to other scores. Any questions? I'm going to ask Gunnar in a minute to move on to a brief review of the other strategic partners, particularly Korea. We have the ambassador in the room. Hopefully you'll say a few words before he has to leave for his own reception. China and Japan. But any questions first on the India summit? I mean, perhaps not as Matty Rice, please, but any other questions anybody wants to raise at the moment. If not, you can keep them also for later on. So Gunnar, quick word on the other strategic partners before we move on to ASEAN and other areas, so Korea, Japan, China.
Well, I just would say, I would just like to comment what Jana said. I think we shouldn't criticize another country for having a strange mentality. When there are democratically legitimized governments in a country of 1.3 billion, we should accept that they have certain development priorities and that they wish to develop and protect in some areas, and they want to aggressively conquer world markets where they are already fully competitive. We have to come to grips with such attitudes. We don't share this. We do believe in comprehensive trade liberalization and investment protection. We don't believe this is the good way to go ahead. We have seen in the case of China that the significant investments of European industry in China has helped to lift hundreds of millions very fast out of poverty. European industry was in the first place involved in this and has led to international competitivity in so many areas and to technology transfers so fast. So there may be also a shift of attitude. But currently it is estimated that there are these needs to protect some sectors, and that is the core of why it is so difficult to agree on a common critical mass which is ambitious enough for us and not over-ambitious for the Indians. And that's what our colleagues from the trade side of both sides are working on. And I think that they will find the right formula in the not too distant future. I agree with Shada, the combination of Brexit, particularly in countries which have memory of colonial rule, but also the uncertainties created by our closest partner across the Atlantic, have led to a significant vitalization. Europe is under much higher demand in Asia. Europe is being discovered that it is not only a club of sovereign nations, but that there is also sovereignty being pooled and exercised at EU level. And Prime Minister Modi was pointing out this at every single visit to the 5 member states this year. Europe is being recognized as being not only a trade investment partner, but also a partner for modernization in many fields, and a partner also for security issues. If there's insecurity in Europe, it's bad for Asian producers. If there's security in Asia, it's bad for European producers. Our economic interdependence means also that we have a security, a connectivity. And so we are developing a lot of cooperation in this, starting with counterterrorism, radicalization, cybersecurity, but also on maritime security. And in these fields, we have stepped up our work with India. We are already doing this for quite some time with China, increasingly with ASEAN partners, which may be also one of the reasons why President Tusk has been invited to, as a guest of chair, to come to the East Asia Summit. When the ASEAN Summit takes place, it ends with the East Asia Summit, where the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Russians, the Australians are coming. And for the first time, we have Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada also invited as guest of the chair, and President Tusk. So I think this is recognition of the fact that Europe, finally, even Asia, realizes this is not only a trade power, but is also having significant responsibilities for internal security and for external security. Which leads me directly into our cooperation with China. I think we have a longer running, much more tense and concrete cooperation with China than with India, if we want to compare. It's not by accident that we had a full-fledged, carefully drafted EU strategy adopted in 2016 on our relations with China, in line with the EU global strategy, emphasizing the need for genuinely reciprocal benefits and for a level playing field between China and the EU. It is that reciprocity which is currently in several policy fields a little bit contested. We need to ensure that we have full cohesion between EU level and our member states, and this is not always evident because there's such strong Chinese charm on so many issues and working on so many of our member states. We have the Chinese leadership having given up its traditional discreet charm by being just a discreet member of the UN Security Council. China is now making well known its views on counterterrorism, on many issues which are of common concern, and is a very good partner for us on climate change, notably, but also on the Sustainable Development Goals and in regional cooperation. And here China is not anymore the silent bystander or supporter, but China is having its own policy on the Middle East, on Syria, in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, China is in a key position as part of the Continental Contact Group on finding the right formula for peace in Afghanistan. But also in Africa in many fields, and we have agreed to particularly upgrade our cooperation with China on Africa, because China realizes that you cannot just invest or have development projects. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of security involved as well, and the Europeans have been engaged with Africa for centuries and are very active, and so we have agreed on concrete operational cooperation in several countries of Africa. The issue which seems to capture most the imagination of think tankers and of journalists is the issue of connectivity, OBOR. In fact, it started as Silk Road, or New Silk Road, it went on to OBOR, now it's BRI, not like the cheese, but BRI, which is the Belt Road Initiative, and there was a summit on this. It is about how to best connect China with the rest of the world, and in particular with you, because we happen to be on the same landmass. It is a serious subject. It goes into all areas, all modes of transport, energy, digital connections, as well as people-to-people links. We are happy about this opportunity to discuss the matters in detail with China, and we have created for that purpose a connectivity platform. It's about European investments in China in this field, Chinese investments in Europe in this field. But we are also working on principles which we need to observe and which we are pushing, not only in the context with China, because there are many others, the ASEANs, the Indians, the Japanese, the Australians. There are so many who are worried about our connectivity, whether it's maritime lanes or air connections or many others. And we are working on principles which need to be observed, such as environmental sustainability, economic and financial feasibility, respect for international norms, no increase of security tensions, and level playing field for all to participate in this. No selectivity, no exclusivity. And if we can agree on these, there will be many more possibilities to engage on this. We have been in the forefront of such efforts with the cross-border liberalization and the cross-border promotion of infrastructure in Europe, but admittedly we are a very small peninsula of the Eurasian landmass, so we have developed then the trans-European networks for our neighbors. But now Europe needs to think global and not just regional. We will therefore, and this is contained in the Commission's work program for next year, issue a strategy on better connecting Europe with Asia, so that the many, let's say, defensive, reactive reactions by all kinds of different levels would be replaced by a more strategic approach on the basis of European interests and on the basis of European and international law, allowing us better engagement on these questions. By the way, we also are going to issue an EU-India strategy next year, so that we do not leave this alone with the China strategy of last year. With Japan, we are making great strides without making great publicity, but there has been, of course, a very successful summit earlier this year, and we have had a breakthrough on both the political framework agreement, which we call the strategic partnership